On October 27, 1943, New Zealand infantry landed on Mono Island in the Treasury Islands. Among the first Americans ashore were members of Company A, 87th Naval Construction Battalion, the Seabees, bringing equipment that would redefine Pacific warfare. They brought olive-drab Caterpillar D8 bulldozers, weighing 20 tons and equipped with 10-foot steel blades. These heavy-tracked machines were designed to move earth and clear jungle. Manufactured in Peoria, Illinois and San Leandro, California, they had traveled 7,000 miles to a remote tropical island. The roar of their diesel engines, mixing with salt spray and tropical humidity, was a new sound in the jungle. Japanese defenders who had never heard bulldozers operate on this scale could hear them working inland. An hour after the initial landing, an incident occurred that became legendary among the Seabees. Machinist mate second class Aurelio Tassone, driving his bulldozer from a landing craft, was informed by his commanding officer that a Japanese pillbox was holding up the advance. The fortification, a typical Japanese defensive structure made of coconut logs and sand, had a machine gun pinning down American and New Zealand troops on the beach, stalling the advance. Tassone made a quick decision. He raised his steel blade as a shield against enemy fire and maneuvered to approach the fortification from the rear. Bullets rattled off the steel. When he reached the position, Tassone dropped the blade, crushing the entire structure, burying the pillbox and its 12 Japanese occupants under tons of logs, sand, and coral. The obstacle was eliminated in minutes, and the advance continued. For this heroic action, Aurelio Tassone was awarded the Silver Star and promoted to machinist mate first class. His exploit appeared in military publications, was illustrated in comics, and inspired a climactic scene in the 1944 film The Fighting Seabees, starring John Wayne. The image of a Seabee astride his bulldozer, fighting and building simultaneously, became an enduring symbol of Naval Construction Battalion operations in the Pacific. Yet Tassone's individual heroism, while significant, represented only a small fraction of the bulldozer's impact. The real story was the mathematics of construction speed and the translation of industrial capacity into a strategic advantage. The Seabees on the Treasury Islands continued working after the pillbox assault, clearing jungle for supply dumps. Within hours, they established secure areas for ammunition, food, and medical supplies. Within days, Seabees had built 21 miles of roads and established a PT boat base. They also began constructing an airfield 5,600 feet long and 200 feet wide, complete with taxiways and gasoline storage. By January 1944, the airfield had been extended to 7,000 feet long and 300 feet wide, capable of supporting heavy bomber operations. In approximately 2 months, the Treasury Islands had been transformed from undeveloped jungle into a major forward airbase. This rapid construction timeline represented a fundamental shift in Pacific War logistics. American forces could capture an island and make it operationally useful within days or weeks. Japanese forces, relying primarily on manual labor, required months for similar projects. This time differential created cascading strategic advantages. Faster base construction meant a faster operational tempo, giving Japanese garrisons less time to prepare defenses for the next American advance. Less preparation time meant weaker fortifications, leading to faster American victories, shorter campaigns, lower casualties, and reduced resource expenditure. The bulldozers made this entire cycle possible. Fleet Admiral William Halsey, who commanded major South Pacific operations, understood their strategic importance. After the war, when asked about the weapons that won the Pacific War, Halsey ranked them in this order: submarines first, radar second, planes third, and bulldozers fourth. He ranked construction equipment above battleships, aircraft carriers, cruisers, destroyers, and every other surface combat vessel. Halsey, who had overseen carrier task forces and amphibious assaults, realized that the American ability to build infrastructure faster than Japan could destroy it was a decisive strategic advantage. The Caterpillar D-8 used extensively in the Pacific came in several variants. The 8R series, produced specifically for military applications from 1941 through 1945, was a somewhat more austere design than previous civilian models to conserve strategic resources. However, the engine output was increased to 130 horsepower. Caterpillar manufactured approximately 9,900 units of the 8R series, most of which went directly to military service in the Pacific. The wartime 8R series, painted in olive drab and carrying U.S. military markings, represented American industrial capacity translated directly into operational military capability. They demonstrated that modern warfare depends fundamentally on industrial production, logistics, infrastructure, and the systematic ability to build faster than enemies can destroy. One Caterpillar D-8 Bulldozer, operated by a skilled Seabee, could move approximately 300 cubic meters of earth per hour under good conditions. This 300 cubic meters, or roughly 11,000 cubic feet, would require approximately 300 workers laboring for an entire day using only hand tools and manual labor. The productivity ratio was approximately 300 to 1. One American operating a bulldozer accomplished as much work in 1 hour as 300 men with shovels working for 1 day. This figure, while not exact, represented a reasonable approximation of the industrial advantage American construction equipment provided. Japanese forces lacked equivalent equipment. The Imperial Japanese Navy's construction units, called setsueti, consisted primarily of Korean and Taiwanese semi-skilled laborers. These units never achieved more than a small fraction of American Seabee capability. Japanese commanders consistently expected these construction units to accomplish tasks requiring heavy machinery, but the machinery was simply not available. Japan's industrial capacity was overwhelmingly focused on aircraft, ships, and weapons production, and construction equipment received a low priority. The few bulldozers and tractors Japan possessed were typically poorly maintained civilian models, frequently breaking down under continuous wartime use. Academic sources on Japanese engineering capabilities noted that engineering machinery such as bulldozers were almost completely lacking because of severe shortages of heavy equipment. Manpower and physical endurance were systematically substituted for machinery across Japanese construction operations. This substitution consistently failed to achieve required results. Human muscle cannot effectively compete with diesel engines and steel blades over sustained periods. Japanese construction battalions on Pacific Islands dug trenches, hauled materials, and cleared jungle with manual effort. Progress was invariably slow, with projects taking weeks that American Seabees routinely completed in days. The resulting time gap meant Japanese defensive preparations were frequently incomplete when American assaults commenced. Multiple examples from different Pacific campaigns illustrate this pattern. On Guadalcanal, Japanese forces worked for months attempting to complete Henderson Field before the Marines landed in August 1942. The field was barely functional, but the 6th Naval Construction Battalion had it operational for American fighter aircraft within days, despite ongoing Japanese bombardment. The speed shocked Japanese commanders, who had devoted months to the same project. On Vangunu Island, the 47th Naval Construction Battalion landed on June 30, 1943. By 3 o'clock that same afternoon, they began fighter airstrip construction. Just 9 days after the initial landing, the first American aircraft landed on the completed runway. By July 18th, less than 3 weeks after the assault, a 3,300-foot runway accommodated an entire fighter squadron. On Tarawa Atoll in November 1943, after one of the most brutal battles of the war, Seabees had the shell-damaged Japanese airfield back in operation within 15 hours of the island being secured. This timeline was barely comprehensible to military planners accustomed to construction projects measured in weeks or months. The pattern of extremely rapid construction following combat operations repeated throughout the Pacific Campaign with remarkable consistency. On Saipan, American forces invaded on June 15, 1944. Seabees went to work immediately on June 19, even while combat continued elsewhere on the island. They filled bomb craters and compacted the runway surface. Seabees had the airstrip operational within 4 days of its capture. American aircraft were flying missions from Saipan less than a week after the assault. American naval and air forces established superiority through preparatory bombardment. After the amphibious forces secured beachheads, Seabee construction battalions, often landing with the initial assault waves, immediately began infrastructure development. Bulldozers cleared obstacles, supply dumps were organized, roads connected beaches to inland positions, and airfield construction began even while combat continued. Each captured island was systematically transformed into a base supporting subsequent American advances. Japanese defensive strategy evolved, but found no truly effective responses. By mid-1944, Japanese strategy increasingly emphasized underground fortifications and elaborate tunnel systems. The goal was to make American victories so costly in casualties that political support for continuing the war would collapse. This strategy led to battles like Iwo Jima and Okinawa. But even sophisticated underground defenses showed significant limitations when confronting bulldozers. When Japanese cave positions were located, bulldozers sealed cave entrances with earth, coral, and debris, eliminating defensive positions without direct assault. Bulldozers also rapidly cleared rubble after fortifications were destroyed by bombardment or explosives, maintaining road access and operational mobility. The machines adapted effectively to every tactical situation, building roads, creating defensive positions, and constructing airfields, even on heavily fortified islands. On Iwo Jima, where Japanese defenders had prepared extraordinarily elaborate underground defensive positions for months, Seabees brought bulldozers ashore even during active combat operations. They cleared ground, built roads, and prepared airfield facilities. Japanese forces spent months meticulously preparing Iwo Jima's defenses, while American bulldozers were simultaneously making the island operationally useful for American strategic purposes. This productivity advantage meant American forces maintained a consistently higher operational tempo throughout campaigns. Each successful island assault led much more quickly to subsequent operations. The pace of American advances accelerated markedly throughout 1944 and 1945, partly because Seabee construction capabilities enabled the rapid transformation of captured territory into fully functional forward operating bases. Post-war intelligence reports, captured documents, and interrogations revealed Japanese awareness of the industrial capacity disparity. Vice Admiral Shigeru Fukudomi wrote after the war that American construction capabilities were among the most significant factors contributing to Japan's defeat. He specifically mentioned construction equipment as a clear example of American industrial advantages Japan simply could not match or counter. Japanese attempts to destroy American construction equipment achieved only very limited tactical success. Snipers targeted operators, and artillery fire was directed at construction sites. Some bulldozers were destroyed or damaged, but Americans simply brought replacement equipment forward from extensive reserves. The fundamental, insurmountable problem facing Japan was overwhelming American industrial production capacity. The United States manufactured thousands of bulldozers and crawler tractors during the war. Caterpillar Tractor Company alone produced 56,036 crawler tractors from 1941 through 1945. Japan possessed no comparable production capacity for construction equipment. Virtually no industrial resources, raw materials, or skilled labor could be diverted to the mass production of construction equipment.
Even if Japan could manufacture them, transporting such heavy equipment through the American submarine blockade to isolated Pacific garrisons would have been logistically impossible.
The Seabees who operated the equipment were often older, professionally experienced tradesmen, with the average age of early recruits being 37 years old. They were seasoned professionals who thoroughly understood earth-moving, road-building fundamentals, and equipment operation. When they landed on Pacific Islands, they immediately applied years of professional expertise to military construction requirements under combat conditions. Aurelio Tassone, who destroyed the pillbox, was 38 years old and had extensive construction experience. His action represented skilled professional equipment operation applied intelligently to an immediate tactical problem. Seabee training combined combat skills instruction and construction trades education. They learned combat skills from Marine Corps instructors and simultaneously attended vocational schools covering nearly every construction specialty, including bulldozer operation, road grading, airfield construction, and heavy equipment maintenance. This dual training prepared them for the reality of operating in remote combat zones with limited external support. By the end of World War II, Naval Construction Battalions had built over 400 separate bases across the Pacific. They constructed or extensively repaired over 100 airfields, ranging from simple fighter strips to massive bomber complexes with multiple long runways. They built road networks totaling thousands of cumulative miles, providing the essential land transportation infrastructure that sustained all American operations. They built complete port facilities where none previously existed, utilizing pontoons and innovative engineering solutions to handle large cargo vessels. They also constructed massive fuel storage systems, medical facilities, communication stations, and freshwater systems. The scope of Seabee construction is even more impressive when compared with Japanese methods. Japanese construction crews typically organized into large labor gangs of hundreds or thousands of laborers working with hand tools under harsh conditions. Projects American bulldozers completed in hours required Japanese labor gangs days or weeks. While Japanese engineers were adept at utilizing local materials and constructing formidable defensive cave systems by hand, these strengths could not offset the fundamental productivity disadvantage. The equipment gap meant Japanese forces consistently failed to complete construction projects before American attacks overwhelmed their positions. The productivity differential created compound effects. American forces advanced faster partly because they could build supporting infrastructure faster. Faster advance meant Japanese forces had less preparation time for subsequent defensive positions, leading to weaker defenses and faster American victories. This cycle accelerated the overall campaign tempo. The final year of the war saw Seabee construction reach its peak. Okinawa, captured in June 1945, was rapidly transformed into a massive staging base for the planned invasion of Japan. The atomic bomb attacks on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August 1945 were launched from Tinian, specifically from North Field, built by Seabees and Army engineers. The bombers flew from runways that had been virgin jungle only about a year earlier. This progression from jungle to functional strategic bomber base to atomic mission launch site in roughly 12 months exemplified the strategic impact of American construction capabilities. None of this construction would have been remotely possible without bulldozers and other heavy equipment. The machines were the foundation of Seabee construction capability. They turned remote Pacific islands into operational military installations at speeds that fundamentally changed the strategic calculus of the entire island-hopping campaign. The island-hopping strategy itself depended partly on rapid construction capabilities. American planners could bypass heavily fortified Japanese strongpoints because they could capture more lightly defended islands and develop them into major forward bases very quickly. Bulldozers made island hopping logistically viable as an operational strategy. The Japanese never developed effective responses to American construction capabilities. While Japanese intelligence searched for technical modifications to combat aircraft or other weapon systems, the truly decisive change was in construction equipment. Bulldozers gave America an overwhelming logistics advantage that superior combat tactics alone could never overcome.
The fundamental lesson of the Pacific War bulldozer story is that modern industrial warfare is determined largely by industrial and logistical capacity, rather than exclusively by combat prowess. Victory consistently goes to nations that can produce more equipment, transport it where needed, maintain it effectively, and replace losses more rapidly than opponents can inflict damage. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, who planned the Pearl Harbor attack, understood American industrial capacity and consistently opposed war with the United States because he knew Japan could not win a prolonged industrial conflict. The bulldozers proved his strategic assessment correct. The bulldozers functioned as weapons, not primarily by destroying enemies directly, but by enabling American forces to fight far more effectively across all dimensions. They built the airfields that hosted the aircraft, the road networks that moved critical supplies forward, and the complete infrastructure that sustained all American operations. Without these construction capabilities, the island-hopping campaign would have been logistically impossible to execute successfully. Wars are won through comprehensive industrial systems that can produce sufficient equipment, transport it where needed, maintain it effectively, and replace losses more rapidly than opponents can inflict damage. The bulldozers operating on the Treasury Islands beginning on October 27, 1943, represented this fundamental truth. They embodied American industrial capacity translated into immediate operational capability and represented the unglamorous but ultimately decisive work of building essential infrastructure that made sustained military victory operationally possible.